So after fitting the trigger to the frame and we've fit the slide to the frame, the next thing that I move to is fire controls. And so we want to look at what we want to do to each of the components in the fire controls so that we have essentially a really light and crisp braking trigger. The first thing we'll look at will be the hammer, and we want to look at the hammer hooks, which is also your full cock notch on the hammer. We want to file those a certain way so that they're perfectly perpendicular to the mating surface of the hammer, and also very, very smooth. Not only do we want them 90 degrees, we want them really, really smooth. So we'll stone those to get that almost a glass appearance on there. And then there'll be a little ridge on your hammer between the hammer hook, or the hammer spur, I guess you would say, and the area that rides in the frame. If you remember, we already stoned the surfaces inside of the frame that the sear and the hammer are going to ride on. Well, now we want these surfaces to be just as smooth and level so that there's no interference or restriction with that hammer as it falls in the frame. And then we'll look at that through this microscope, which is a 25 power microscope, and inspect those hammer hooks. And then we're also going to take the sear, and one of the things we're doing by squaring the hammer hooks is we want the mating surface of the sear and the hammer to be perfectly what we would call neutral or parallel when it's engaged. And so we're going to do some work on the sear as well. We'll put that in a fixture, and we're going to work on stoning that surface, both what's called a primary angle and a secondary or relief angle, which helps the sear to get out of the way of the hammer faster. And then we're going to polish these sides. We'll stone and polish the sides of the sear itself for the same reason we did this surface on the hammer, so that it flows freely inside the frame. Lastly, we want to just kind of lightly polish these 2 feet that are on the sear. That is where specifically the left one, if you're looking at the sear, is where your sear spring rides. So we don't really want any interference there. So we'll polish those out so that's nice and smooth as well. That's really all that needs to be polished on the sear. And then we have the disconnector that we'll polish the head, maybe slightly radius the head of the disconnector so that it flows freely underneath the slide as the slide cycles back and forth. We want to polish the flat surface of the disconnector, because that is the part that's going to ride on the trigger bow at the rear of the gun. So we want that to flow freely. This surface on the opposite side, this angled surface, we want to just polish that, a nice polish on that, because that's where the disconnector leg of the leaf spring rides on the disconnector to provide upward force into the frame, so that slides up and down that spring leg. And then lastly, even though it's not contacting the frame, we want to polish this surface around where the sear excuse me, where the sear pin goes through, and this surface, because it actually rides inside of the sear. They mate together, and that sear pivots back and forth on the disconnector. So we want that to be nice and smooth and free flowing as well. And then that'll pretty much cover what we need to polish on those 3 components. However, on the leaf spring, we have 3 legs, and we want to polish a couple of surfaces there. Just on the inside of the hook for the sear spring, the sear leg of the spring, we want to polish that so that it rides smoothly on the sear leg. And then we want to polish this surface and maybe even just break the edge at the top so that slides freely up and down on that angled portion at the back of the disconnector. You can polish the edges on both sides of the third leg, the short leg, which is for the grip safety, but it really doesn't benefit anything for trigger pull or how the trigger actually functions. So that's what we're going to be polishing and stoning and fitting for our trigger job on this gun. So I'm going to set some of this stuff up in fixtures. I've already taken a quick look at it under the microscope at the engagement surface of the sear and the hammer full cock notch, and there's really not a lot of work that needs to be done on the hammer or the sear on this gun. So it's going to be primarily light stoning just to get a good smooth surface at the right angles so that those break apart freely and will give us a nice smooth and crisp light trigger break. So I'll set those up. So we've set the hammer up in the fixture to stone that full cock notch. Looking at this particular one under the microscope, it was machined very well, so it's already essentially perpendicular. So basically all we need to do is just stone that surface. So what I'm going to do is just take a hard Arkansas stone. Normally I mount this fixture in a vise, and we'll be doing that later when we do the sear more than likely, and then have both hands free. But in this particular instance, all I need to do is just run this stone along that leading edge of those hooks where the sear is actually going to ride. And we'll get that nice and square. And it's such a small surface you may not even be able to see what you've done, but there should be some shiny spots along those hooks right there. And we're looking to polish that upward surface, not so much this flat surface, because nothing rides there. So I'm going to take just a few more strokes with that. Does not take a lot. And those look really good. So we'll call the hammer done with that, other than we need to polish the sides. And take it out of the fixture to do that. And what I'm going to do for polishing these sides, because we do want a good flat surface, we'll get our stone back out, or our granite back out rather. And I'm probably going to start with some 320 grit paper, and we'll see how it cleans up. It's surprisingly, it's stainless, but it has a little bit of pitting and rust in it, so we want to fix that. And I'll just hold it down and put some light pressure, because I want the sandpaper to actually cut. If we push down too hard on the sandpaper, all we do is remove the abrasive. And I don't want to remove the abrasive, I want the abrasive to work for me. So light pressure, and then I'm going to see, once I get this polished out, if I can give you a little bit of comparison before I do the other side as to essentially what we're looking for. There will be machine marks in that surface, and we're not really too worried about taking out machine marks, because ultimately we're eliminating the high spots. That's what we want to do. The high spots are what need to be polished. The low spots don't make contact. And that looks pretty good. We'll probably go a little slightly higher polish grit just to have a nice finish on it, but let me see if I can kind of show you that that's not mirror finish, but it's got a really nice polish to it. And then we turn it over and our other side looks pretty dull because we haven't done it yet. Nice polished side. So I'm going to work on this a little bit more, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the sear. So I matched up the hammer and the sear in the portion of the fixture over here. The hammer goes here, and then this insert that the sear is mounted to sits in this cavity, and you bring them together to get your proper mating angle. And then I've got this set up, and again, this one was in pretty good shape on the angle, so I don't really have to do anything as far as material removal or angle changes. So I'm gonna, here again, this is one's a little, looks like it's a little easier, so I'm not gonna bother putting it in the vise at this point. And I'm just gonna come in once my angle is set on the sear and start stoning that sear face and try to get a really good angle on that and a good polish. And you just want to, you know, if it looks like it's kind of shiny, then that's probably about where it needs to be. And it moved, so I'm going to have to take this back out now and inspect my angle that I was talking about with my hammer. So the sear slides in like so, and then I'm going to take the hammer and the hammer pin, and I'm going to insert them in this fixture, and then put some pressure on the sear legs to bring it into the hammer, and then I'm going to bring the full cock notch down to where they mate, and that's the angle that I am trying to stone. Once I have that perpendicular angle on the hammer hooks, I'm now orienting the angle of the sear face to that same 90-degree angle. And this doesn't hold really securely, so you kind of have to keep an eye on it when you're moving it. It would be nice if there was something that held the sear legs fore and aft, so that you could not have to worry about the sear moving and you could just stone it. But unfortunately, that is not the case on this fixture, and I've got just a hair of engagement with this stone guide, and I think it's just going to be enough to get that angle that I want. And then I'm just going to come in and stone it again and try to get a good shiny surface on the face of the sear. And once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and cut my secondary angle. A couple more. Cut my secondary angle, and then I'll remount everything in the microscope and see how it looks. And I think that'll probably be okay. Now, there is this adjustment screw on the bottom of my fixture to move the sear up and down with the secondary angle. There's no adjustment screw. You just have to kind of eyeball it for something so precise. So again, we'll take our machined fixture, and I'm just going to bring the sear up slightly above and then again, I want to just watch that sear for movement. If it moves, I'll have to reset it and cut again. Oh yeah, you can feel that cutting that secondary angle. Even with an Arkansas stone, it's cutting it, so that's good. Alright, I'm going to take that out, and I'm going to see how that looks under the microscope. And we'll be back. So we've now finished all of our work on the sear and on the hammer. One of the things you want to make sure they spin freely on the pin. You may need to polish the pin to get that good smooth feel on it. But we've polished out. We stoned our proper angle on our primary surface of the sear, and then we've cut our secondary surface. I'm going to have pictures of those that I'll post of just the primary cut, and then once we made the secondary cut, so you have a feel of what you're looking for. Polish these two legs on the base of the sear and polish the sides. So the next thing that we're going to need to address is going to be the disconnector, and it's not as critical as the hammer and sear are, but it is still a very critical factor in your trigger job and your trigger work on a new build. So again, just to recap, we're going to stone this face. We're going to get it pretty smooth, pretty glassy. This one out here we're going to work on, and then the area around where the sear pin goes on the sides, where it rides inside the sear. So I always like to start with the angled portion on the back, and I just pull it across, make a couple of passes with it, look and see when I get through the finish, how does it look? Looks pretty good. Probably not going to take a whole lot, and that'll probably do there. The face of the sear where it rides on the trigger bow, I tend to do the same thing, just make a few passes on like a 320 and see how it looks. And this is a good example. If I can try to get you can kind of see the discoloration. There's a lot of low spots there. That's a little more than I want, so I'm actually going to mildly remove a little bit of material with this 320 paper until I get it doesn't have to be a perfect finish across the face, but I do want to have good amount of contact surface on the trigger bow. And getting there. So I'm going to work on that a little more, and then I'll come back and we'll show you the stoning portion of it. Yeah, so we have a good, nice polish on our disconnector surface. A lot of people get really hung up with this having to be perfectly uniform all the way across. And it really does not need to be. We're simply smoothing out the high spots. On the sides, I wanted to show you, I'll take a stone and turn it on its side and just run it back and forth on the disconnector till I break the finish and start seeing a little bit of shiny metal, and at that point it's pretty much good. And just something, see if we can get that, something along those lines. Just break the finish. And then the head of the disconnector, I just want to take any burrs off. Just make sure there's nothing going to stick up through that flash hole. We're not really radiusing it off. We want to keep that end on it. It's just a matter of smoothing. The last thing would be the sear spring. And again, the side that has the little hook on it, I want to just hit that area right in there. And then I want to hit just the center leaf for the disconnector. I want to just hit right there and maybe slightly radius that. So. Only putting pressure on the sear leaf. Easier said than done, but that's how you. And again, just smoothing it out. And then I'll move to my center leaf. And just taking the edge off. That should be okay. Alright, so we'll put all of this together, and we're going to assemble the mainspring housing, and then we will see how it performs.